Welcome back to my T3.2e truggy build. This is going to cover bag 8, which is the rear hubs. And in this build, I'm going to use some aftermarket aluminum hubs. But I'll show you the ones that come with the kit and we'll talk about that. So let's get started. Okay, so here we are in table view. These parts mostly over here are the aftermarket. So these V2, they say they're for the buggy, but they work for the truck as well. The aluminum rear hubs. I've already assembled one of them just to try to figure out how to do that before I went on video. So we got the pieces for the second one here, and we'll go through that. One thing to note, the kit comes with a flanged bearing, and I discovered if you try to use this flanged bearing, it doesn't actually allow you to line up the wheel adapter. So you actually have to get an aftermarket. I already happen to have some from Avid, but you have to get an aftermarket bearing that's unflanged to use the aluminum hubs. And it was covered in there's a little manual, like press release that you can get off of AE's website, and it was covered in there, but it threw me for a loop because I was trying to figure out why things wouldn't fit. Yeah, and so this unflanged bearing, it's an 8 by 16 by 5 bearing. And so you need to replace this flanged bearing with this unflanged bearing. Otherwise, it will not fit correctly. So we can just stick that in this insert. And we can go ahead and stick it in this hub. We've got this other bigger one that we can stick in here, and we can grab the main bearing. Again, seals always go out, so blue for this one, and then these are Avid, so they're yellow, but seals out. I'm not sure why they gave me 2 extras of these smaller inserts. I was trying to figure out if they go somewhere, but as far as I can tell, those are not, they're just extra. They're not required. But I really like how most aluminum hubs, you insert the bearings into aluminum and they have a tendency to want to move in the hub because it's really hard to get that fit correct. So I really like these plastic inserts. I think that was a good plan by AE. Then you've got this slot here for the hinge pin, and you can put these inserts in either up or down, and then there's this one in the middle to adjust the height of your hub. I'm going to go with a stock setup, which has these going up. I just find if you kind of start them and then press them in, sorry, it's hard to show you that, but press them in on the table, that really helps. So just try to get them kind of started straight and then press them. It's a little easier if you do it on the edge of the table so you can let it hang off. Sorry, I can't show you guys that, but if you do it on the edge to let this piece here hang off the table, those will push right in, and you can look through the back side to confirm they're all the way in. Then they have these carbon plates, and these are different heights. They allow different Camber Link angles to control the camber gain. The stock settings are these ones with the 2 holes, and so we're gonna do that. Okay, so we're gonna put these carbon plates on, and the stock setting is this dual height one, if you use any of these plates other than the top row of the dual height, it requires you to change this camber link to a straight one like this. But anyway, we're gonna set this up at the stock settings for now, which doesn't require you to change that. And the trick with these screws is you want them to go in opposite directions. Let's get that one in correctly. But you want them to go in opposite directions, otherwise you'll struggle to get the nut driver to fit in there. So you have a nut, one on each side. And you can see the orientation, so the hex for the wheel would be out here. And you can see these kind of bend out towards that hex, just like that one. And these aluminum ones aren't handed. You can put them on either side, which is kind of nice. So let's tighten these nuts up. All right. So then the next step here is we'll build this CV. And for the rear, the manual tells you to lubricate this barrel, but for the rear, I don't like to lubricate it because when you don't lubricate it, it generates a little more binding, which generates traction. So I do not lubricate. I only lubricate the front. That gets a lot more movement because of the steering, so I like to lubricate that one. But the rear ones, I do not lubricate them. Also helps to keep the dirt and dust under control in them. So you put that pin in there, and it's the smaller of the pins. And then you slide this into the bearing and it captures that pin. And then I got this hole sticking out here. And before you put this hub on, you want to put this clip and slide it all the way towards the hex, so it's out of the way of the hole. And then you slide this on, align those holes, and stick the bigger pin in. And then you can drop that clip over the pinhole. And then finally here you get this set screw, and you secure that pin with this set screw, and you want to use a pretty liberal amount of thread lock for the set screw. And so I take an old wheel here. This is actually my pavement tires. Mess around in the street by my house, but I use a wheel to hold that and tighten that set screw up. So there we go. We got both of these hub assemblies built now. This stuff is all tuning optional parts that we'll put aside. So yeah, the next step here is bringing the rear end over. Let's move these over here. We'll bring the rear end over here. So the next step is putting these on the car. And you'll notice there's quite a bit of play with these hubs in the arm, and you use these spacers, 3 of them, to control the wheelbase and take up that space. The one thing I want to do before we put it in here is I just want to check these holes, and they feel pretty good. You know, these aren't as much like the hinge pins where they slip out under their own weight, but they still feel really smooth, so I'm not gonna do any adjustments to that. Yeah, that one is a little tighter. I might drop a reamer through that one just to make sure. So yeah, it's the 3.5 millimeter reamer that goes through there versus the 4 on the other side. So I'm just gonna clean that up a little bit. Kind of rotate it some as you do that. Then we'll check this one more time. Yeah, so that's quite a bit better. I'm gonna just do it just a little bit more. Sometimes you can come in from the other side too. Those holes are just not like 100% concentric, which is why it's binding a little bit. Okay, so let's try that one more time. Yeah, there we go. So that's pretty good. Feels similar to the other one now. Alright, so the kit setup has the big, thicker spacer in the back and the other two smaller spacers, you know, and these smaller ones are a different thickness, so you got to make sure you put one of each in there to take up that gap. But they put the bigger one towards the back, so we're going to put this hinge pin in with the bigger one on it, and then we're going to slide in the hub, slide that just until that starts poking out. And then we'll grab these other two and feed them in. Sometimes you just gotta kind of spin this around to align those other ones to get them in place. There we go. So yeah, got that, and then you finally take one of these flange nuts and put it on this end. And let's, is that the right one? No. Looks like we got the 2.5 for that. So you tighten this down. And these ones are such that you can't pinch, it leaves some space in there and you can't pinch this arm. But some kits, you will have to be careful on how much you tighten that and make sure you're not pinching this arm on the hub and making it tight. So then the next, well, I'm going to do the other side off camera, but the next step here is going to be, okay, this stuff's getting in the way. Let's move that out of the way. All right, so we'll, next we'll stick this link on. I'm just going to do one side and I'll do the other side off camera, but if you remember, there's a ridge here versus a taper, and you want the ridge to point left if you want your turnbuckles to tighten when you go back, which is the way I like mine. And I've already set this whole ball joint up to do exactly that. So the kit setup has this in the middle hole. We'll stick it in the middle hole. If you compare these two like so, you can figure it out. Actually, it looks like the kit setup is in the back hole. So we'll go with the back hole. So yeah, we'll stick this on like so. It's these longer screws here. These longer screws, not the super long ones, those are for the shocks. This thing is not quite lining up with this plate. So you might have to, if you can't get it to line up like I'm struggling to do here, you might have to loosen these back up. Maybe it's better to put this Camber Link in before you tighten those. So yeah, we'll stick that on. Grab one of these flange nuts. Actually, no, take it back. This is these nuts, unflanged nuts. And we will tighten that down like so. Might as well tighten this one back too. Then finally here, we can stick this on, which, if you remember, I put these aside already. Okay, so if we look at the kit setup, that link position on the tower, it's the inner middle hole. So there's 3 holes, top, middle, and bottom, and it's the middle hole. And then you can hold the other side with the 2.5. And just remember, I haven't adjusted these links for size yet, so we'll still need to do that, which is why they're a little bit wonky. But that wraps up the left side. I will finish the right side and come back. All right, so I got both hubs on the car and both links, and remember, both the sharp edges point left and the tapered edges point right. Rotating to the back of the car brings the camber in or tightens. One thing I wanted to show you guys is I adjusted these links some. I noticed it was different than the kit setup. Yeah, it was they were roughly 53 millimeters, so I adjusted that. And the one thing I just wanted to show you is when you're adjusting these after you do, you want to make sure these move freely and they're kind of in the middle on both sides. And I purposely made this one, you can see where it doesn't move as much, and if you just kind of back off this a little bit other way, you can kind of get them to where now it moves really nicely. But you want to make sure you have that movement and they're not like both tweaked the other direction, and that's right at the, sorry, it's 52 millimeters actually. So 52 is where I got these. So yeah, the rear end's complete. The next step here is we put this rear end on the chassis. I'm gonna rearrange my table and we'll get started on that. All right, so we got things set up here with the chassis. One thing I did want to comment on is if you're using these stock hubs, there is a set screw that goes right in that hub to secure this bearing in place. So we didn't do that step on the aluminum hubs. They don't have that feature. So yeah, let's keep on going here. So the next thing we want to do is there's this unflanged nut and we want to stick it in here like so. It is not wanting to go in. Sometimes you have to get these things in just right. They don't like to go in. Oh yeah, so we're gonna grab these pliers and see if we can massage this in. Wowzers, that's tough. So if you look at that hole, you can see if you got this thing all the way in or not. And still not quite all the way in. All right, there we go. Let me just check this. Okay, so that nut, it was really stubborn. I ended up having to take this brace off and grabbing a punch and pushing that all the way down in so that hole would line up properly. You can use, you can use one of your hex wrenches to possibly do that. I don't like banging on mine though and marring them up, so I used a punch. So we got that nut in. Definitely wasn't easy. So then we got this rear end that we need to put. Actually, we need to make sure this drive shaft goes on the right side. There's a cutout in this brace, so make sure that goes on the right side. And then this C block has a little post that sticks in here. So we take the smaller screws up front, and there's some longer ones. Remember, they go through that diff housing. And we'll have to check the gear mesh again once we put that on. I'm just gonna screw this one all the way down just to hold everything together so it isn't stubborn with me. Alright, so we got that one in there. Let's put these longer back ones in. Sometimes you might have to massage that. There we go. That case in. You might have to push on this case to get everything to line up properly. Second one went right in. I'm just going to put all these in before I cinch everything down. So we'll do a X pattern on these. Whew, getting a workout. Who says that RC isn't a sport? Definitely getting a workout cutting these threads. Okay, and then the last screw here goes into the brace. That is a little not entirely lined up. Sorry, I'm gonna have to do this off camera, I think. If you flex the chassis a little bit, I'm having to do it kind of upward to get that chassis brace screw in. And then I'm gonna come back, I'll show you. So I had to kind of push down on this to get it to line up. We got that in, but I'm gonna come back now and loosen these just to relieve some of that tension, hopefully. Let everything kind of settle in. We could have probably loosened these instead of pushing on the chassis, but just loosen those up a little and then we'll tighten them back just to make sure everything's seated properly in there. Okay, so there we go. We got the rear end on the chassis. And that concludes bag 8 of this build. Actually, I guess, sorry, there is the shocks, but I'm going to save those shocks for later. So that concludes bag 8. Hope you're liking this build series, and please look in the on the playlist to find all the other ones, and tune in for the next one.